Kamado Nezuko, high-powered best girl with the best speaking lines in the series, and series sister ex-machina of Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba. So what have we got here today? In the series first, I have a two-parter for Nezuko, a race and a barbarian subclass based on the demonic progeny of Muzan Kibutsuji. This one's gonna be a bit of a doozy, but for part 1 of Nezuko, I'm gonna focus on a new race, the Hemo Traitor. Welcome to my wife is the MC. I'm DMV and you're watching Husbando Homebrew, a show where we take pop culture to pen and paper. Today we get our hands bloody with one of two new character options. The first is a new race called the Hemo Traitor. This is based on the aberrant nature of Kamado Nezuko, and by extension Lady Tamayo as well, as they are prime examples of demons who retain their will and values. Before we begin, make sure you step on that like button and blow up that subscribe button before it kills your older brother. Part 1. The Basics. Hemo Traitors like Nezuko are children of the progenitor demon Muzan Kibutsuji. In spite of his blood flowing in their veins, they have separated themselves from the man's dark hold and live on their own, caught between protecting humanity and fighting the urge to consume them. I could have called this race blood demons or just straight up demons, but I find that it conflicts with a lot of existing material in official books. So I opted to get a little bit more fancy and used some Latin to make it a little more unique. So let's start with the typical traits. ASI grants a +2 to Constitution and a +1 to any other stat of your choice. I picked Constitution to be the bigger bonus here because the demons of Demon Slayer have really high regenerative abilities. But more on that later. Demons are basically immortal as far as I'm aware, so you cease aging at the point of your transformation. Alignment can be neutral or good, but their unique physiology stops them from truly blending in, making them lean towards a more chaotic mindset. Size is your standard medium, typical 30-foot speed, and you know common and infernal. Oh, and you get 60 feet of dark vision, which I can't exactly tell if it's a thing among demons, but considering that they have nocturnal activities, I'd be surprised if they didn't have some sort of night sight. And the buck stops here, because we're now about to get into the weird stuff. Part 2. Power. First is creature type. You are not a humanoid, no. You are a fiend. So stuff like hold person, charm person, or dominate person don't work on you, because you're not a person. Next trait is progenitor's aberration. This is more of a flavor/ribbon trait that makes you magically undetectable to the king of pop. As promised, we have demonic regeneration. This one gives back some lost HP equal to your con mod at the start of each of your turns, provided you have at least 1 hit point. You also regenerate limbs or stitch them back together quickly. Now before you throw the unbalanced ball my way, note that this power comes at a cost, but more on that in a bit. Next is Empowered Body, which grants you a higher unarmed strike damage, which becomes magical at 5th level. Again, this all comes at a cost later on. Fiendish Resilience. Okay, here we go. This one is lengthy, but with good reason. You can't be killed by regular means, and while exhaustion is still a bad thing for you, you can't die from it. Now since you don't play by the adventurer's rules, I basically had to make a new one from scratch, much like stat blocks of powerful entities like vampires or the Revenant race. Let's take a look at the cost of all this power in Part 3. Cost. So how can your character die? One way is when you are reduced to 0 hit points from taking radiant damage. No KO, no death saves, just a minute-long disintegration. This means an errant guiding bolt or sacred flame can tear up your character sheet. Another way to kill you, well, your character, is if you get beheaded by a silvered weapon. Basically my 5E justification for the Demon Slayer's Nichiren weapons. How can you be beheaded, you might ask? Well, if you're reduced to 0 hit points, you still make death saves as normal. Remember that you need 1 HP for your regeneration to kick in. You can get stabilized and you'll be fine in a few hours just like a normal adventurer. But what happens if you fail all 3 death saves? You essentially enter a death-like state of unconsciousness for about 24 hours, and nothing short of a resurrection spell would wake you up earlier. You're completely vulnerable during this time, which means anyone with a half-decent Nichiren blade can pluck your head off your shoulders, or just leave you out in the sun, but we'll get to that in a bit. The penultimate trait is Sunlight Hypersensitivity. This one can be deadly if you're not careful. You have several disadvantages while in sunlight, but the worst part is that you take radiant damage equal to your level at the start of each of your turns while in the sun. Remember that bit about dying to radiant damage without any death saves? Exactly. The last trait and the final price you pay for all that power is flesh hunger. This is more of a double-edged sword rather than a full-on debuff. Rations of regular rubes no longer satiate you, and it's intended to not work with spells like Goodberry or Create Food and Water. Instead, you feed on human bits. Well, humanoid, so you kobolds and goblinoids aren't safe either. This one asks, note asks, not requires. This trait asks you to consume at least 1 pound of humanoid flesh or blood to keep yourself satiated for 24 hours. You don't need to sleep while fed, and you can gain the benefits of a long rest with only 4 hours of light activity. The kicker is that if you don't feed, you start to crave it. If you are suffering at least 1 level of exhaustion while conscious, which can happen if you don't eat, you have to make a wisdom saving throw every hour or you start to attack the nearest humanoid for 1 minute. The DC starts at 10 and it goes up by 1 every time you stave off the hunger, and it resets on a long rest, or if you eat. This trait does give you a choice not to consume, however. In exchange, you'll have to sleep. No, not long rest where you can do light activities for 2 hours, no. You have to sleep for 16 whole hours to keep yourself active for the next 8 without going hungry. Like Nezuko coming in clutch out of the box, however, you do manage to remain aware of your surroundings while asleep. I get that the price can be a little steep, and to say that it limits the player's time role-playing or engaging with party activities is a valid criticism. But as I said in the first episode of this series, I take the story element first as my first priority and really bake it into the mechanics. And hey, a good DM can keep you engaged even if your party operates at odd hours. Part 4. Pick a side. Are you a strong-willed enough demon who will defend humanity, or will you give in to your hunger? The race is a challenge in a player's commitment to character. It's easy to gain a lot of power and use out of it, but is your character meant to consume human flesh in the first place? Getting power is easy, but the true test of a player is role-playing to your disadvantage in favor of story. Like, comment, and subscribe for more D&D Homebrew, and make sure you share this to your older brother. While the Nezuko Homebrew isn't complete without a subclass, you can still see the documentation for the race in the Ko-Fi link down in the description. Hopefully, your campaign doesn't start until next week. As always, thank you for being here, and I appreciate you for making it to the end of the video. This has been my wife is the MC, and I'll see you in part 2 of Nezuko's Homebrew on the next Husbando Homebrew.